Well, I was born in San Francisco and lived there till, well, for 30 years. Well, 4 years out of that in the Navy and during the wartime. And I went through school there, just through high school, no college. And then the war came along, and so I joined the Navy and spent the better part of 3.5 years there, and ended up in the South Pacific. And a lot of things happened there. Well, when we went to Pearl Harbor, and then I went to the Big Island of Hawaii. I was there for a year, working at a aircraft service carrier unit. And the pilots all came there with their planes and had their final training before they went on board a carrier at our unit. I was there for a year, and then a buddy and I decided we wanted to go see what was happening out there. And so we volunteered to go on a carrier. So we left Pearl Harbor on what was named the Benjamin Franklin. It was a carrier, brand new. And when we went down there to the Philippines, all of the sailors had to have their hats a certain way. They had to have their sleeves all rolled down, and everything was just GI. So we got there, transferred over to our carrier, which was the Essex, the first of its class. And 4 days later, the Franklin was almost sunk. And it was it took a kamikaze, and quite a few people were killed, listed very much on one side, but it managed to get back to Pearl Harbor, and they worked on it. And then it was all wartime from then on. When we were at the Philippines, when we pulled back from the group and went into an anchorage place in the Philippine Sea there, one of our planes was flying over the group there, and it was a captured plane by the Japanese, and he dove right down into one of the ships there. Not ours, but another ship. Yeah, so when we thought of, it was our plane, it was okay, but it wasn't, because the Japanese was flying it. But we saw many Japanese planes shot down, bursting in flames or just going down and slamming into the ocean. One of them came down, and we thought it was going to hit our ship. But at the last second, it pulled up, took part of our radar off of the main section there, and crashed into the sea. But before he did that, he dropped a 2,000-pound delayed action bomb. And several fellas and I were in our sheet metal shop there on the deck that was just below the flight deck. And all of a sudden, when that bomb went off, it didn't hit the ship, but it came down right by the side of it. And when it blew up, it was a delayed action bomb. And when it blew up, it just, you ever see a little boat in the bathtub? Well, that's how we felt, like that it was there. And I saw, a lot of what I thought was smoke coming down from underneath the flight deck, and it was dust from belly tanks that they'd put on the airplanes to have more gas. So it was just a bunch of dust that was accumulated up there. And so we managed to get through with it, okay. Didn't stop our operation. But when we got back to Bremerton, Washington, it was well, that's where they dock the ships sometimes and put them into the, what would you call it? Dry dock. And all the water was out. We got to walk down and look up at the ship underneath it. And they had removed, because of that bomb, out of one side of the ship, they had removed a section 30 feet long by 20 feet wide. Yeah. So we were fortunate. The Lord was so good, though. Oh, my. And I didn't even know him then. When I was in school, I played the trumpet. And when I got out of school, graduated, I bought a horn for myself and to keep playing. And so when I went into the Navy, I sent home to get my horn. And I was practicing one day in Farragut, Idaho, in a snow area. And they had a gymnasium that was, it seemed easy, a block long. It's a huge thing. And but very nice. It had rooms to the side, and I went into one of the rooms and locked the door and took my horn out and started to blow. And after a little while, I heard a knock on the door. And I went and opened the door, and my boot camp chief was at the door. And he says, "Oh, it's you, Russo." So I said, "Yeah." He says, "Hey, what kind of horn do you have?" And I just handed it to him, you know. He says, "Do you mind if I blow it?" I said, "No, go ahead." It's never been blown the same. Well, because he was a professional, and he had played in Harry James's band up until he went into the Navy himself. And so he and I became real good friends. And he was kind to me during that time. I had hurt my back, and we had to go out on the lake, row big old tub-like rowboats, and on Lake Ponderay in Idaho. Anyhow, he was real nice to us, though. And after the war, when I came home, Harry James's band was playing in San Francisco, so that's where I lived. And I said, "Well, I'm going to go. Maybe my friend will be there." So I went. He was still playing with him. So having that instrument along in the Navy was really a blessing to me. Yeah, because I got to play on board the ship and with the regular band, and it just kept me out of a lot of trouble. It's then that I hadn't been married or anything, and so I had found a girlfriend, and she was, she had worked with a couple who were Adventists. She didn't know they were Adventists, but the woman didn't wear lipstick, she didn't have dingle-dangles on, and she took an interest in my wife. And so they kept in touch, and then when we were courting, she phoned one time when I was at my wife's place, and my girlfriend at the time. And I had met them, she and her husband, and they had 2 boys, teenage boys. And so we went there and to her house, and the phone rang, and she answered, and it was this lady, Lucille, the Adventist lady. And she said, you know, Laverne, she said, Marvin and I have been thinking about it. That was her husband. And we'd love to study the Bible with you. Would you be interested in that? And Laverne had no upbringing of church or anything, neither had I. And she said, yeah, okay. I started to read the Bible one time, she said, and then I got to the begats and everything, and I gave it up. So she, and then Lucille told her, she said, bring Ward along if he wants to come. And when she mentioned that to me, I said, oh yeah, I'll go. I wasn't interested in the Bible, but I liked her husband. What a prince of a man. I only met him one time, and he was just different than anybody I had ever met. And so when she said that, I said, yeah, I'll go. It just took a few times and we were hooked. And we studied with them for about a year. They showed us 20th century films from the Voice of Prophecy. They showed us those, and we had studies for about a year, one time a week. At the end, well, when we first started studying, we brought our cigarettes along. And we were smoking when they showed the film, and that light was just streaming out there, and our smoke was billowing through the light. And they didn't smoke at all, and they didn't say anything about it. But once we started to learn about Jesus, oh my, it was wonderful. And then the prophecies that pointed to him, and the history, you know, the Bible's really a history book that foretold things that would happen, and they've happened. And so I was really enthralled with that too. But after a few weeks, my wife said, you know, can you picture Jesus smoking? And I said, no, I really can't. She says, why don't we quit? So we took our packaged cigarettes and squeezed them up, threw them as far as we could throw them. We were littering. And then we haven't had a cigarette since. That was 60-some years ago. Yeah. So I'm very thankful. The Lord took that away from us. For about a year, when I saw somebody smoking a cigarette and taking a big drag on it, I could feel a sensation in my throat with that smoke going down. No smoke was going down, but that's just the sensation I had. But I don't have that anymore. It was about a year. So anyhow, about in 1953, we were both baptized. I went to the pastor and asked him if I could be baptized. And he said, sure. He says, you think Laverne will be baptized too? So he told her, and she said, oh yeah, I'll be baptized. So it's been a wonderful trip. I wouldn't trade it for anything. We got married, we had our children. I was working in sheet metal, that was my trade. And at the church we were going to, a fellow knew I was doing that kind of work, and I knew he was. he was working for someone in the church, and they installed furnaces and such. And one Sabbath, he saw me outside there. He came up to me and he said, "Don't you know you're not supposed to be in the union?" I was in the union then. And so anyhow, I thought, well, I'm going to go find out about this. I didn't know anything about it. So I went to the conference office, and the man who was in charge of the lay activities, I would say, and I talked to him for quite a while in his office, and he didn't give me anything, you know, that I could really grasp a hold of. And I said, well, don't you have something that I can see, you know? And he went to the cupboard and he pulled out these sheets, and they were quotations from the Spirit of Prophecy. And of course, Mrs. White said, no, we shouldn't have anything to do with unions. And so I decided, well, that's all I needed. I quit then. I quit the trade. And then I canvassed for 3 years. And during that time, this is how the Lord led, I believe. And I canvassed for about a year in Oakland. And then, while I was at the office one day, my boss mentioned that there was an opening up here. And the people that had given us Bible studies owned a ranch just 2 miles up the road from here. And I talked to him, and I talked to the owners, our friends, and they asked us, would you like to live there? They had asked us before. And I said, sure. And I went up there one weekend with them and helped them plant trees. And when I told them that this area was open for a call porter, they said, sure, move up there, move up there. So the conference moved us up here. And we've been up here ever since for, I don't know how many years, about almost 60 years now. But while I was canvassing around here, we had our 2 small children. They were about 5 and 3. And I was going to work one day after a couple of years up here. And they said, Daddy, we hope you don't sell any books today. And I said, what? Don't you like to eat? and they said, well, we don't see you anymore. Because I have to go back in the evening sometimes. And it was taking me away like that a lot. And I thought, well, I guess this is the Lord telling me you better take care of your first responsibility, my children. And so I did. I went back to my trade. I found a non-union shop in Napa, and worked there for 4 years. It was the winter time, and there wasn't much work. And the boss says, well, you come in. I won't pay you, but if any work comes in while you're here, then you can do the work. And I did that for a while, and there wasn't any work. I wasn't earning any money. So I prayed about it, and I said, Lord, if there's no work today, I'm going to go look for a job. So there wasn't any work that day, and so I took off, and I went to St. Helena from Napa, and there was one shop up there, and I went into that shop, and they hired me on the spot. So I was there for 4 years. But then when I quit there, this is the Lord leading again, my children were getting to the point where one of them was ready to go to college, Pacific Union there, and I wondered, how am I going to pay for them? And so another Adventist fellow worked up by the hospital, St. Helena Hospital, and he did the same work I was doing. And he came to me one day, we were working on the same complex in St. Helena, and he said, would you consider going in as a partner with me? And I said, would I? So we did that for the next 18 years, and I was able to retire then at 65. Yeah, so that's our life. But the main part has been the Lord in guiding me along the way. Really, it's amazing to me how he would do that, because I was such a louse, a rat, what you might say. You know, in my younger years, I was sitting all the time, and I couldn't understand how he could forgive me for those sins. But when I finally realized it, I was so thankful. I didn't think it would ever happen, but I'm glad, so glad that he's been so gracious to me. Yeah, and my wife too.